Welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast, the photo imaging industry's leading news source. Here's your host, Gary Peugeot. The Dead Pixel Society podcast is brought to you by Media Clip, Advertech Printing, and Independent Photo Imagers.
Hello again and welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. I'm your host, Gary Peugeot, and today we're joined by Jean-Pierre Lacroix with Chick-fil-A Lacroix Design, and he is a longtime branding expert. And in the pre-show, which I wish I would have recorded, we learned we probably crossed paths probably 20 some years ago in the industry, but we're not really talking about that right now. Hello, Jean-Pierre, how are you today?
Fantastic. Thanks to be on your show, Gary.
So how did you get into this branding business? I mean, you've been in it a long time. What energized you to get into this?
Well, I couldn't find a job. I'm just kidding. No, I grew up on an Air Force base. My dad was in the Air Force. I grew up in Germany, actually. And when we came back to Canada, my dad got into the electronics business, and then we got into the garden business. And I always had an affinity for the arts. I was painting signs on the trucks and on the farm signs, but I also had an affinity for being in the Air Force. And so I applied for two colleges. I applied for ROC, the Royal Military College in Kingston, and applied for a graphic design course at a local community college in Toronto. And I said, whoever responds to my application first is where I'm going to go. And obviously Sheridan College responded, and I never made it into ROC. My grades weren't good enough. So, fate had it. I ended up being a designer and I have never regretted making that decision, although design has changed dramatically, a lot for the good. And I spend my time flying. I fly about 200,000 miles a year because we have offices in China and we do work around the world. So I got my Air Force value out of business travel.
There you go.
Yeah.
Cool. So one of the things I want to talk to you about is branding, because one of the things that the misinterpretations I see with people when they talk about branding is they think like a logo is a brand, right? It's the Coca-Cola logo or something like that, and it's not that at all. So in your world, when you're talking to a potential client or someone about branding, what are you talking about?
Well, we start with the foundation of a brand, which is what is the value proposition that product service offers the consumers that they're willing to pay for that is different than the competition. So we'll start there. We say, what is your value proposition? But we go deeper. We don't just say, what's your value proposition? We say, what is your functional value proposition?
Right.
There's also, what's your emotional value proposition? Because we know that 80% of all buying decisions are done emotionally, and they're done in a split second. Hence the Think Blank book that I released in the marketplace. It's about making that emotional connection. That's where we start, because that's the foundation. If the foundation of a house is shaped or is not solid, the house is going to crumble sooner or later. And so that's where we start. Then we say, how do you take that value proposition and translate it into the personification of that value proposition, which is, how do you apply it to a logo? How do you apply it to packaging? How do you apply it to the website, the mobile app, all these different, what we call consumer touch points. Mm-hmm. But it really starts with, where are we in the marketplace? What value do we bring? How is that relevant to our target group? And where most brands get into trouble is that they've stayed static. They've lost their relevancy with their consumers. Mm-hmm. As the consumer market shifted, younger generations have different values. They're very focused on purpose brands and what's your purpose in the marketplace. Right. And if brands haven't stayed relevant with these shifting trends, they're in trouble. And there's this great model called the brand curve, which is an S curve. And most brands do their transformational when they're in crisis, at the top, at the peak, right, relevancy. It's too late. Once that brand starts declining, it's very hard. Gravity takes hold. It's very hard for them to change. So the trick is, as the brand is growing, as they're building their equity in the marketplace, it's constantly evaluating, are we relevant? Do we remain relevant? Is there anything that's going to change that relevancy? And that's what branding is all about.
Well, in the news recently, we've had a major branding error that everyone's been talking about, which is the whole Cracker Barrel fiasco. Now, it seems to me like they did what you just said. They were in the market for a long time, and then they decided they were going to make themselves relevant. And then now they've had to walk that back. What was your perception of as this thing was unfolding in real time?
Gary, the big mistake they've done is that they did not evaluate their emotional equities that they owned with the consumers.
Right.
They're very fixated on going after the younger generation. And most brands are saying this, they're saying, okay, how do we appeal to Gen Z and Gen Xers? How is our brand remaining relevant to them? But don't forget your core customers, because if you
Right.
forget those, you're basically launching a new brand, which is basically what Cracker Barrel did. They lost the equity of their brand, their emotional equity. They moved away from the character on their logo. If you saw the rendering or the pictures of the inside of their restaurants, they're stark, they're pretty plain. There's
Hmm.
no sense of discovery, this sense of shopping experience that the old Cracker Barrel had. I remember
Hmm.
taking my daughter and my wife to a Cracker Barrel in Florida, and it was a whole experience. And it was
Hmm.
catchy, it wasn't slick, but it was familiar, it was comfortable, the food was
Hmm.
great, the service was excellent, and it was an
Hmm.
experience. They
Hmm.
lost that. And that's
Right.
why they're getting ding. I mean, I'm kudos to the CEO that she's backtracking the
Hmm.
strategy, going back to the basics,
Hmm.
because they have to do that.
Right.
But they're not the only ones. J.C. Penney, remember the gentleman from Apple became president, and they're the mistake. And this is the mistake most brand transformations do. We have this model we call the trust ladder. You have a vision of where you want to be, and J.C. Penney went from where they want to be to or where they are to where they want to be in one step. And the reality, they should have stepped it and built the trust with the customers along that journey. And that's what Cracker Barrel did also.
Hmm.
Maybe it would have been good just to start with the logo, make a
Hmm.
logo change, but keep the inside. And then,
Right. Most of these are rolled out gradually when you
yeah,
see them. They don't.
yeah, but no, they didn't do that. So they lost the core equity, the
Mhm.
emotional equity of their brand, which is back to their value proposition. They destroyed their value proposition.
So the interesting thing I think is, as I was like most business people, journalists reading this stuff, kind of you did some research and they were struggling, right? Cracker Barrel was struggling, especially post COVID.
Yeah.
They tried some home delivery and that helped. So I think they realized they thought it was a branding or awareness issue to, like you said, get Gen Z and Gen X to leave their basements and come to Cracker Barrel. But what should they have focused on instead?
They should have first understood what are the core equities of the experience that are the foundation of their brand, and how do those things link to this sense of authenticity, sense of belonging,
Mhm.
which is our sixth tenet in our book, or the fifth tenet in my book, sense of belonging.
Mhm.
They lost that sight, and had they looked at that, they would have been able to create a modern experience. And the other insight I would say is this: when you think, we do work around the world. So if you're trying to appeal to Gen Z, Gen X, it has to be a selfie moment.
Mhm.
So think
Right.
of the new design for Cracker Barrel. There is no selfie moments.
Right.
There's no situation where people can take a selfie. The old stores, the old concept, the old
They
restaurant concept,
they were filled with them.
there's tons of selfie moments in there where you're shopping in the store, taking up, these unique items that you would never find anywhere else and taking a picture review with it. They lost that. They lost the selfie moments.
Right. And it seems like that's in general what's happening to kind of the fast food and fast casual industry, is that most of their stores are kind of being denuded of personality. They're just boxes. If you look at a Taco Bell and a KFC and a McDonald's and a Burger King, they're all basically boxes, right? There's no more play lines, and their menus are becoming radically similar, right? I'm waiting for Taco Bell to bring out burgers one of these days because they're all adding each other's products. What do you think about that? That sort of neutralization of those emotional experiences.
Well, number one is we did a huge study this year, and you can find on our website on the food service industry and what is actually driving growth. Why is it that Chick-fil-A is so successful and some of the other chains are so successful? Is in the things like and the brands like McDonald's and Starbucks and KFC are struggling. Why is that happening? And so we
Mhm.
dug into that, and what we found out is this: you have two factors. You have what we call attrition detractors. These are things that stop customers from leaving your brand. But they're not the ones that are going to drive that customer to come more often. So they'll always think of you for burgers, McDonald's, but
Mhm.
instead of going to McDonald's once a week, they're going to go to McDonald's once a month,
Right.
which is killing a business. And then there's what we call the growth factors. And it's one sentence is shareable moments, shareable emotional moments. And so when
Mhm.
you look at these brands, Chick-fil-A, Chick-fil-A, when you walk in, you're greeted by the owner of the restaurant and they're thanking you for coming in. Name me one other fast food chain or fast casual chain where the manager's at the door
Mhm.
thanking you for the business,
Right.
picking up empty trays,
Right.
and walking around the tables and asking you, are you enjoying your meal? Like,
Right.
name me one other fast casual or fast food restaurant chain that does that. Zero. And
Mhm.
so they've lost this emotional connection and they've lost the ability of sharing that emotional connection with their friends because that's where true brand loyalty is. Brand loyalty is you're willing to wear on a tattoo the Harley Davidson logo, right?
Right.
You're willing to be a badge for that brand.
Mhm.
People are not walking around as a badge with McDonald's. Now, I have to say, Starbucks still has, we just finished a big study looking at Starbucks. They still have a lot of emotional equity in the marketplace,
Sure.
but they lost their badge value because they went from being an experience, the third place,
Mhm.
to being a transactional place where takeout is more important than dine-in. And if you look at Starbucks' new designs, they
Mhm.
shrunk the whole front
Mhm.
seating area
Right.
and they made the takeout area much larger. So what they're saying to consumers is, we're no longer an experience, we're
Right.
a transaction. And when
Right.
you become a transaction, you lost the customer.
Yeah, it doesn't make a difference because I mean that's exactly what's happened with other restaurants, right? I mean, we look at if you look at a, you can see where they maybe knocked down an old McDonald's and they put up a new one in the same place, and it's two-thirds the size, and it has mostly drive-through
Yeah,
business.
exactly. And what
I
you're
mean,
doing,
and it's one of those things where I think they would say, well, the trends are people are doing more drive-through, and I would say, well, you're basically that's the message you're sending them is that it's only for drive-through.
yeah. So we did, we do a lot of studies to understand consumer dynamics and behavior. So we did a big study in the banking industry that mirrors the study in the food service industry. And this is the insight. The more you move consumers to online banking, the less loyal they are to you.
Right.
The most loyal customers are those that use all your channels. And I would say fast food and fast casual is the same situation. The more they use all your channels,
Hmm.
not just takeout, the more
Hmm.
loyal they're going to be to you. And so that's part of that. Again, emotional connection, a sense of belonging. They're moving consumers away from that sense of belonging.
Hmm. Well, spinning this to the photography industry, what is more emotional than that, right? Than
Yeah.
people's memories
Yeah.
and presenting people's pictures and sharing them and all that. What would be your advice for, let's say, an independent photo store who's been in a community for a while, 10, 15, maybe 20 years, and you feel like you're getting stale? You think everyone knows who you are and all that. What would be your first steps with someone like that?
Well, you're talking to the guy that invented the Kodak Image Center, 30
I am
years
indeed.
ago.
Yes, I knew
Yeah.
that.
We're the firm that invented and it went global. And we're also the firm that invented the Kodak Colorkins.
Hmm.
We invented those characters to create
Hmm.
those emotional connections. And so what I would say to the camera operators is this, is service is really important. Product selection, service, price are really important, but they're not your drivers of growth. Your drivers of growth is allowing those customers to share their experiences using your equipment, your products as part of their social network, and giving you a plug,
Hmm.
on how you enable them to do this. So it needs to move from transaction. We got to sell more cameras this week. We got to send more lenses. We got to sell more of this or that. To what is that experience? What's that experience when they come to your store? And what's
Hmm.
that experience after they left and they bought your product? And how do the two tie together? And how do you create that emotional connection back to your brand? Because people don't remember the features and benefits of a retail experience, like features, products, services. They remember how you made them feel. So
Right.
how are you making your customers feel? And what is that experience that delivers that?
Mhm. So when you were developing the Kodak image centers
Mm,
around the world, I mean, there was, like we were talking prior to the
yeah.
recording, it didn't really take off here in the US to a great extent, but there was wildly successful in other regions of the world. Was that part of the mandate? Was that emotional connection, or was it just, hey, we want to drop the Kodak brand everywhere because it sells more film?
Oh, it's both. Obviously, I wanted to leverage the brand equity Kodak had in the marketplace for these independent dealers who are getting into the mini lab business. As you recall, that was the big thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was also, we had a concept that never took flight called memory stores. And memory stores were really about how do you take photography and imagery and apply it to merchandise. So I think a
Mhm.
lot of what's missed in the marketplace is how do you merchandise memories? How do you make it tangible and
Right,
marketable? And so that
right.
was that whole idea that you can put it on mugs, you can put on T-shirts, it could be a birthday, you can
Mhm.
create different settings, digital backgrounds, or
Right,
So it was this idea that making a link between memories and how it applies to people's lives.
right.
And I think that's the opportunity for photo studios is how do you, especially those targeting the general consumer. I mean, you've got like Henry's here, which are a really upscale, sophisticated camera
Yeah.
retailer. What they're selling is expertise. Come here, we're going to give you advice, expert advice, because we're all shooters. We all take pictures. But it's that relationship you build with that expert and the knowledge that they impart on you to allow you to explore your full capabilities that makes it
Mhm.
work.
I think one of the challenges we have as an industry in the photo business is you're not selling a prepackaged piece of goods. You're really selling somebody's memories, and to actually have a transformation happen where you're taking those pixels and you're transforming them onto a product, right? Whether it's a canvas print or a metal print or a mug or whatever. And it's very difficult to convey that online,
Mhm.
right? So you have to do it physically in stores, but there's so many retailers who are pushing people online. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll come back to say that online sales have plateaued. They're at 17%. They were much higher during COVID. Will they
Mhm.
grow? Yeah. But most retailers who've got into e-commerce are losing money on the platforms. Only the large, like Walmart's making money. Not sure Target is, maybe they are,
Mhm.
but most retailers who have entered the e-commerce are actually losing money. Cost of distribution, cost of returns, those are killers on margin.
Mhm.
So you're also appealing to only a small segment of the population, and they're you're their least loyal customers. So think of this: you're going to spend all that money
Mhm.
building a channel where you're going to appeal to your least loyal customers
And probably most price sensitive.
and most price sensitive, and where Walmart's going to have you over the barrel.
Right.
Yeah, so not a good idea.
Mhm. So, how would you recommend, since you do have some experience in the photo channel, to get people to get that traffic in the store from a branding standpoint, right? Not advertising, but how do you build that community? I mean, people are trying classes, they're trying photo walks, they're trying all of those kind of things, which I think are having a degree of success. But what are some of your thoughts?
Well, I think it starts fundamentally with the sense of belonging. And so creating a sense of belonging. And what I mean by that is having your social strategy to drive brand ambassadors,
Mhm.
because they're the ones that are going to speak about your brand to a broader spectrum. They're the ones that have credibility in the marketplace about why they would shop at your store. And so I would first start focusing on how do I create social engagement? How do I create
Mhm.
brand ambassadors? What is the role of the store to drive that? What's the
Right.
role of my website to drive that?
Sure.
But it starts with social selling first, believe it or not. It's a different paradigm because now more and more consumers are buying not online, they're buying through social media platforms.
Right.
They're buying through
Or
TikTok.
recommendations at
Yeah,
least.
exactly. And so that's where I would start. And I would
Mhm.
leverage all the other brand touch points to drive the consumer to that social engagement and brand ambassador vantage. And that would drive, and then you say, okay, what are the, within those other dynamics, those other brand touch points, what are the strategies to make that happen? Well, okay, giving courses inside your store, that's a great platform because that's networking and that sense of belonging. But the mistake they make is, how do you take that and link it back to social, right?
Right.
There's a break there. It's not seamless. And then if you look at all the other activities, how do those drive social engagement, right? If they
Right.
complete, and the other mistake that most organizations make, these independent camera stores, they have great ideas because they're entrepreneurs, it's the shiny new thing, and they get excited
Exactly.
about, right? But they're not sustainable. Like, how long have you been doing this podcast?
Oh, this is 5.5 years.
All right. Right. If you started this podcast and then gave it a break for 6 months and then started over again and gave it a break for 6 months, would
Right.
you be successful?
No, of course not.
So why would they're doing the same.
Some would say I'm not successful now, but
Yeah. But
I have you on, so I have to be somewhat successful.
there you go. Well, you're successful now. But if you think, one of the key factors, if you ask me, what is going to drive success, it's focus and persistent on a focused strategy, right?
Right.
And persistent is the key word. They start great initiatives. They have these workshops that's driven by one employee who's passionate, who's really
Right.
involved, and then they move on to another job. And then all of a sudden the whole thing just craters and there's a void.
Right. Yeah. I've seen that happen, right? It does happen where, sometimes even I've seen it where the owner of the company has like an employee who they get a following, right, within their community because they're the person who does like the film photo walks or they do certain things. They almost see that employee as a threat and they don't want them involved anymore. They change their job. It's like, oh, you need to do this. And then that whole experience just drops away.
No, I think that's the biggest mistake. Now, don't get me wrong. You need to set the guardrails on what's acceptable practice
Sure.
in organization so that you don't
Right.
get slammed in the community because of these, unacceptable photograph images appearing, or an approach that is hard sell and not community driven. So, but once you set those guardrails, let me ask a question. How do you achieve brand ambassadors
Hmm.
if you don't allow your employees to be brand ambassadors,
Right.
right? I mean, by putting those, handcuffs on them, you're limiting your
Right.
ability to drive growth.
Sure. How often do you think a store should be refreshing their look inside, right? I'm not talking about a total rebrand, but moving things around or whatever. Because you always hear about that. It's like, every quarter I got to change it up. What are your thoughts on like store refreshes inside? Again, I'm not talking about like a rebrand. I'm just talking about like, refreshing the merch and all that.
Well, typically today the model is this is a retailer will refresh their store when the lease is up. So they'll either negotiate with the landlord some enticement to renew the lease, and in there's some dollars for refreshing the store so that they're hedging their investments. And typically that's a 7 to 10 year lease, depending on
Right.
if you're in a high traffic mall, then it'll be 5 years. If you're in a street side, it could be 10 years.
Right.
And that typically historically has been kind of the cycle of renovation, if you want, or brand refresh, if you want. But that's a mistake because consumers now, there's lots of competition online and other retailers and other channels of retailers that these camera stores are competing with. And so you're constantly having to say, come in, we've done something different. Come in, we've done something different. So
Hmm.
that's on the renovation side. So I'd say 5 years. Start
Hmm.
thinking at year 4, start planning for year 5.
Hmm.
But the other thing is that, we do a lot of work in the electronic retailing. And one of the key principles is create some key strike zones as they enter the store and some focal walls where those are constantly changing, like with the feature of the month, the
Right.
product of the week, and say new product of the week, product of the
Hmm.
month, or employee pick. But those
Right.
you can change because
Hmm.
what you're trying to do is communicate to a customer who may have entered your store. Because you think of photography, there's getting the images processed, which could be cyclical, or buying film, to buying equipment. They're not buying that every week. They're buying that maybe once a year, maybe every 2 years, or maybe every 3 years. And so you're losing that cycle of relationship that happened.
Right.
So by having something new in the window, something that entices, they may
Mhm.
not want to buy it, but the fact they walk into your store
Mhm.
gives the salespeople an opportunity to continue that relationship so that
Mhm.
when they are going to buy,
Mhm.
you're the place they're going to go to.
And the other thing is not necessarily make it about a product, right? Because I mean, I'll talk to retailers and say, hey, oh, the new Nikon's out, so that's what I'm going to push. But I think a really good analogy here might be like independent bookstore. Because one
Mhm.
thing that's really cool about independent bookstores is you walk in and they'll have a shelf or a table where it's our staff picks.
Yeah.
And the staff will, write a little card. Hey, I read this book and I think you'll like it, kind of thing. And I may not be interested in it, but at least my perception of the bookstore is much higher because now I think, well, at least their staff reads books, right?
Yeah. So I'd give you to your audience, another key insight. So we did another big study on the importance of community.
Hmm.
Is being part of the community a key driver of loyalty? And the answer is yes, a resounding yes. And so when you think of these independent retailers, there's camera store operators, your competitive advantage is you're in the community. You're not a chain. And even if you're a chain, you're a small chain. You're part of the
Right,
community. And so amplifying your commitment to the community is
right.
critical. And so having a photo contest where you actually showcase people from the community taking pictures,
Hmm.
it's brilliant. You're celebrating the talent in the community. You're elevating photography and people who are passionate about photography in the community,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
so highlighting photographs and the name of the photographer or a picture of the photographer of that
Hmm.
individual is critical. They live in this neighborhood.
Hmm.
So again, anything you can do as an operator, a camera store owner, to tie your activities to the community, sponsoring a local baseball team. Those are
Hmm.
really important. And you being responsible for taking a picture of the team. Those are
Hmm.
all really important things that drive growth and loyalty, but also to help you differentiate from the big chains.
Hmm. Yeah, because like you said, at least in photo, unless you're talking about Walgreen or CVS or someone, there's not a lot of large chains to compete with anymore.
There's not, but then you think of when you start thinking of equipment, you've got
Yeah, then
Walmart.
you're competing nationally with B&H and Natarama and all those folks. Yeah.
Exactly. So you're competing. And those are big ticket items, with
Hmm.
some reasonable margins. It's not the frequency, but you want to make sure that when they're making those big ticket buying decisions
Hmm.
coming to you, but also the idea, like at the end of the day, the mobile device is kind of in a way undermined the industry. It's
Oh,
actually
sure,
it's
absolutely.
elevated photography, so everyone takes pictures,
Right.
but it's elevated average photography, not quality photography. And so
Right.
Apple may argue this point, but I don't care. The idea here is that if you celebrate people who do exceptional photography, who are not professional photographers, you're communicating that everyone can be that way. So you're becoming an inclusive model to let more people
Mhm.
participate in being in the photography. I remember
Aspirational,
yeah.
right?
So I'll tell you a little story. So we were doing a big project for Eastman Kodak. It was a chain of portrait stores in California, Your Expression.
Hmm.
We were doing the rebranding, reinvention, leveraging Kodak's technology as part of the infrastructure. And we were doing research and we are asking consumers, why aren't you getting your portrait done? Like, why?
Right.
Why is it? Well, you know what? And the common comment was, well, all those pictures of those people, they're all models. I'm not good enough. I don't
Right.
look good enough to have a professional photograph taken of me.
Right.
So what did we do? In the windows, we took a picture of a mother and daughter, a picture of a gentleman, a business person. We said John Smith from Bakersfield,
Right.
Martha and Rose from XYZ, and we humanized. And we said everyone can. You don't have to look good to have a portrait taken. And I think it's the same thing goes to photography. You don't have to aspire to be a professional photography to take enjoyment in taking pictures.
Right. And then doing something with them, right? Because I think the taking pictures part, there's no barrier to that, right? Like you said, smartphones are everywhere. And I think to some extent it's diminished, if you will, the utility of photography, right? Because you are just taking pictures of receipts and everything, right? There's no cost really to do it. And I think there's actually been a backlash to that where you have people moving towards film, back to using film. And doing prints where they may not have been doing prints longer because they want that authentic experience. Because one of the criticisms I heard about is that with smartphone cameras is the pictures are too good. They're fixing too many of the flaws. They don't even look like human beings anymore with some of the processing involved.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. And in independent camera stores or the doorway, the promoters, if you want,
Mhm.
of returning to the art of photography, right? And that's what
Mhm.
we're talking about here. We're talking about the art of photography, right?
Right,
And the art is make an investment in the cameras you use, make an investment in the quality of the films, and then obviously the finishing of those images from photo
Mhm.
finishing to application to merchandise or within a picture book, right?
Right.
And so that's the opportunity. And the good news is you're right, there's a revival. There's a revival in vinyl records, right? I mean,
Right.
there's a whole
Exactly.
resurgence of things. I mean, we do work with Fuji right now. We do all of their packaging for their instant cameras. There's a huge revival of instant photography with Fuji,
Sure.
right? Huge. Didn't exist
Yeah.
before. And they're competing with, digital, with mobile devices.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a big business for them, is the Instax business.
Yeah,
So spinning that back to Kodak a little bit, we were talking a little bit about kind of branding, sort of, Kodak has so much brand equity
it does.
in the consumer mind, right? The Kodak moments, and they do some licensing business, right? Where they do license it. But I've always felt that there's more to be done with that. What are some of your thoughts on what like Kodak could do with that equity in the marketplace?
They moved away from Kodak moments like sharing memories, which was the core equity. They lost sight that sharing
Mhm.
those memories didn't have to be,
Well, and to be honest, they spun that off, right? And it's a whole other
uh,
thing now. But yeah, you're
yeah,
right. They kind of abandoned that. Yeah.
yeah, and that was because it was silver halide technology. They limited their view that the end benefit to the consumer wasn't that it was silver halide. That was just a vehicle for the consumer to capture those special memories. They
Right.
lost sight of that. But put that aside. So I would say to Kodak, if I was sitting in their boardrooms today and I'd saying, well,
On the 19th floor.
on 19th floor, the last time I was there, that floor was empty. But anyways, put that aside. I would say people are capturing an immense amount of pictures,
Right.
an immense amount of pictures. So the ability of storing those images is, with Apple demonstrated, it's not the device,
Right.
it's what the device connects to and how that connection helps people control their lives. I think there's an opportunity from that perspective of being able to control their content, if you like, in a way that's better organized. I'd say that's one. I
Hmm.
think the other one is they have to get back to promoting the art of photography.
Right.
You need to take an advocate position to celebrate where they were, celebrate
Hmm.
the art of photography. And Kodak survived, their medical device industry division continues to do well. I mean,
Hmm.
our X-ray business continues to do well. I mean, although it's a lot of it's now been digitized and AI, but it's the consumer side. It's
Hmm.
celebrating the art of photography. They need to bring that
Right.
back.
Yeah. So speaking of, we haven't really talked much about the book. Can you talk a little bit about your new book, which I think just came out in May,
Yeah,
which kind of encapsulates a lot of what we were talking about? Can you talk a little bit about the book?
yeah. So we coined the phrase blink factor in 1990. We're doing work for Pizza Hut in the US,
Hmm.
and people were calling it red roof. And so we went back and looked. What does that mean? Well, people make instant decisions based on color and shape. And so I coined the phrase the blink factor and then trademarked it in 1996. That was 10 years before the Blink book came out by Malcolm Caldwell. This is my fourth book. I wanted to provide a legacy to my employees and to my clients and to business owners like the ones who are watching this show to say, you know what, the future isn't functional. The future is emotional.
Mm-hmm.
You're competing on price, you're competing on promotions, you're competing on features. You're never going to win. It's a declining, it's a commoditized model. You need to win on the emotions because 80% of all buying decisions are emotionally driven and they're done in less than a split second. And so owning that split second and making those emotional connections. And so how do you do that? We created 7 tenets and they build on each other. For the first tenet, it's really understanding what is your core emotional equity? What's that value proposition that's emotive that you own that you need to leverage? Number 2 is how do you take those emotional equities, translate it to design, the customer experience, the employee experience, the packaging, the signing, your identity, all those things. And then you go into what's the brand story, right? We learn through storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
What's the story you're telling your customers? What's the story you're telling your employees? How does that tie to your value proposition and to your experience? Are you using your store as a canvas to tell that story? Then it's personas, we call it context. Who are your core target group?
Mm-hmm.
What's not just their demographics or psychographics, but what's their lifestyle needs? Like if you think of photography, there's segments of photographers. There's professional freelancers, there's professionals, and then you've got weekend amateurs, and then you've got everyday users, and then you've got occasional users, and those have different needs and priorities. And understanding those, you can build products around it and service models around it and be that expert. And then from there, once you define their personas and their customers' story, you get into really understanding what are the key factors driving their motivations. And that's really about understanding what are the metrics and the sense of belonging. So the next tenet, sense of belonging, is now that you've told the story, how do you get them involved in that story? How do you get them to tell that story? And then from there, how do you measure that you're successful? And the last tenet is, how do you future-proof your brand? How do you avoid what Kodak did? How do you avoid that you got blindsided? How do you avoid how Blockbuster got blindsided? How do you avoid, or CompUSA? How do you avoid these brands that were dominant in the marketplace that got disrupted by emerging technologies and knowledge? So how do you stay relevant in those? So those are the 7 tenets.
So where can people go to learn more about what you do and the book? Where can people get more information?
Well, they can go to our website, www.sld, that's samlovedog.com. If you go there, you go under resource, you'll see, or actually on the landing page, you'll see a page with the book. You can actually download for free the first chapter of the book, and then you can decide if you want to read further.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation talking about this. When we booked this call, I didn't realize you had all this background with Kodak Image Centers and all that. And it's been a great refresher, but it's also, not necessarily a look back, but a look forward. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you for listening to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. Read more great stories and sign up for the newsletter at www.thedeadpixelssociety.com.